The air was heavy, the kind of weight you feel when something life-changing is about to be spoken aloud. Cameras flashed, the room was still, and Meghan Markle sat across from the world with eyes already glistening, as though she had fought back every tear she could before the moment finally broke her open. Her voice trembled, her hands clutched together, and when the words came, they cut through the silence like a blade. For years, speculation had swirled. For years, whispers had chased her name across headlines and gossip columns, fueling debate and suspicion about her pregnancies. And now, with a quiver of her lips and a sigh of exhaustion, Meghan confessed the truth that millions had doubted, millions had wondered, but none had truly heard until this moment. Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana had both been born through surrogacy. She had never carried them herself. The revelation did not just break the silence, it shattered it. It was not the kind of admission that simply dissolved into news cycles within hours. This was the kind of moment that felt like history cracking open. You could almost hear the collective gasp across the globe, from Buckingham Palace's gilded halls to living rooms of ordinary families who had followed every step of Meghan and Harry's story. For some, it was a vindication of long-held suspicions. For others, it was a betrayal of trust, a confirmation that what had been presented as authentic had been, in their eyes, carefully constructed theater. And for Meghan, sitting there with the world watching, it was both release and ruin all at once. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The beginning of this story does not start with her confession. It begins long before, in those carefully orchestrated public moments, the polished baby photo ops, the tightly controlled royal press releases, and the way Meghan's every appearance during her supposed pregnancies was scrutinized more than any royal woman before her. There was something unusual, something elusive, that had sparked those whispers. Why did the palace lock down details about Archie's birth certificate? Why was the media barred from seeing Meghan enter or leave a hospital? Why did she appear in photographs one day looking heavily pregnant, and the next with a silhouette that seemed different? These questions had lingered in the shadows, never fully answered, always dismissed by those closest to her. For years, Meghan and Harry had fought those rumors tooth and nail, sometimes with lawsuits, sometimes with silence, sometimes with carefully curated public statements. But rumors, like smoke, find their way through even the smallest cracks. And when those cracks spread wide enough, the truth that hides behind them eventually comes spilling out. That is why her confession now feels so monumental, not simply because she admitted to using surrogates, but because it confirmed that years of public perception had been manipulated, intentionally or not. But why now? Why, after so much denial, after building a wall of secrecy so high, would Meghan choose this moment to tell the world what she had kept hidden? That question itself is what grips the imagination. Was it guilt? Was it exhaustion from carrying a burden too heavy for too long? Or was it strategy, another move in a battle between herself, the palace, and public opinion? To understand that, we have to peel back the layers of silence and secrets, to revisit the timeline of how Meghan and Harry's family story unfolded, and why surrogacy, such a common practice in modern society, became such a scandalous point of speculation in theirs. The middle of this story lives in tension. It is not merely about a woman who confesses, but about what that confession means to the world she inhabits. Meghan's admission isn't just personal, it touches the monarchy itself. For centuries, the crown has thrived on the purity of bloodlines, the legitimacy of heirs, the careful documentation of royal births. Every royal baby, from Queen Elizabeth to Prince George, has carried symbolic weight as much as personal significance. And in that context, Meghan's revelation does more than humanize her struggle. It shakes the very foundation of how royal succession and royal authenticity are perceived. If Archie and Lilibet were born through surrogacy, does that change their standing in the line of succession? Does it tarnish their claim to titles and privileges? These are not just cold legal questions. They are questions that cut into centuries of tradition, into the very identity of a monarchy already fraught with modern scrutiny. And yet, behind the politics, behind the palace protocol, lies the raw humanity of Meghan's struggle. Imagine living with that secret every day, knowing that every photograph of you cradling your stomach, every headline congratulating you on motherhood, Every curious glance from strangers was anchored in something unspoken. How much courage or desperation does it take to finally break that silence? As she sat, trembling in her confession, Meghan seemed to embody that paradox, the freedom of finally telling the truth and the devastation of knowing the consequences it would unleash. The confession also exposes the role of Harry, the man by her side through it all. Did he encourage this moment of truth? Or did he sit in silent dread, knowing the fallout would be catastrophic? His face, weary and pained, told a story of its own. A man torn between protecting his wife, honoring his children, and reckoning with the monarchy that raised him. The truth Meghan spoke was not just hers. It was his, too. Together, they had chosen secrecy. Together, they now bore the cost of unveiling it. As this admission ricocheted across the world, reactions were instantaneous and ferocious. Headlines screamed. Social media ignited. Commentators debated whether Meghan's honesty was brave or manipulative, whether this was a moment of redemption or deceit. Some applauded her for being transparent about her journey to motherhood, arguing that surrogacy is no less valid a path than natural birth. Others felt betrayed, claiming they had been lied to for years, sold a story that was never true. The polarization was immediate, and it was unforgiving. But perhaps the most haunting part of this introduction is not in what Meghan said, but in what she left unsaid. If she had hidden this truth for years, what else remained hidden? If the palace had played a role in shaping this narrative, what does that say about the institution's relationship with truth itself? These are the lingering questions that hang in the air, questions that turn this story from a personal confession into a larger exposé about power, secrecy, and the cost of image in the world's most famous family. And that is where we arrive at the end of the introduction. Not an ending in the traditional sense, but a cliff that the audience now stands on, staring into the abyss of what comes next. Meghan's confession is the spark, but the fire it ignites will consume more than just her reputation. It touches Harry, their children, the monarchy, and the world that has followed them so closely. This is not just a story about surrogacy. It is a story about truth versus tradition, secrecy versus survival, and the personal battles waged beneath the blinding lights of global scrutiny. The journey that follows will unravel layer by layer. The whispers of suspicion, the palace's hidden maneuvers, Harry's silent torment, the media wars, and finally, the explosion of global outrage that now threatens to redefine not just Meghan and Harry's lives, but the image of the monarchy itself. And yet, in the midst of scandal, perhaps lies an opportunity for understanding, for a world to question why truth can be more scandalous than a lie, and why a mother's confession, wrapped in tears, could shake the foundations of an empire. Every scandal begins with whispers. Before Meghan Markle's tearful confession, before the headlines screamed of surrogacy and secrecy, there were murmurs, quiet, curious voices that noticed things others dismissed. Those whispers grew louder with each public appearance, each carefully staged photo, until they began to sound like thunder rolling in the distance. To understand how the world arrived at Meghan's stunning admission, we have to go back to the beginning, when the seeds of suspicion were first planted. It was 2018, and Meghan Markle, newly married to Prince Harry, was stepping into the most scrutinized role any woman could hold, a duchess carrying the next generation of the monarchy. Royal watchers around the globe held their breath as the palace announced her pregnancy. At first, it seemed like a fairy tale. Meghan and Harry had just returned from a tour of Australia when Kensington Palace revealed the news. The announcement was delivered with excitement, painting the picture of a radiant new mother-to-be. Yet, even in that first glow of celebration, some began to notice that things didn't quite fit. Royal pregnancies, traditionally, are managed with clockwork precision. Every detail, from the hospital where the baby will be born to the doctors overseeing the delivery, is carefully shared with the public. Princess Diana's pregnancies were documented with openness. Kate Middleton's 3 children were born under the eyes of the press, with photographs outside the hospital becoming iconic moments of modern royal history. But Meghan's pregnancy was different from the start. The palace withheld details. Meghan's public appearances were rare and closely managed, and even when she was seen, the images often sparked more questions than answers. There was the now infamous moment when Meghan stepped out in a cream dress. her baby bump appearing unusually pronounced, almost as though it had grown overnight. Days later, at another engagement, her silhouette seemed slimmer, flatter, leaving observers bewildered. Some chalked it up to camera angles or wardrobe choices, but for others, it was enough to spark suspicion. Could it be that Meghan's pregnancy was not what it seemed? Social media amplified those suspicions in ways that previous royal mothers had never endured. Side-by-side comparisons of her bump circulated online, with critics pointing out how it seemed to shift or fold in unnatural ways. A viral video even showed Meghan crouching to greet a child, and as she bent, her belly appeared to shift oddly, fueling speculation that she was wearing a prosthetic bump. While loyal supporters dismissed the video as a trick of fabric, others insisted it was proof of a hidden truth. The conversation was no longer confined to gossip columns. It was everywhere, debated in forums, dissected in YouTube videos, whispered about at dinner tables. Inside the palace, there were attempts to silence these rumors before they spiraled out of control. Statements were carefully crafted, emphasizing Meghan's health and well-being. Palace aides were instructed to keep birth details private, citing Meghan and Harry's desire for independence. But in trying to control the narrative, they may have only fanned the flames. Secrecy, in the context of royalty, always breeds suspicion. If there was nothing to hide, people wondered, why were so many details kept under lock and key? Then came Archie's birth certificate controversy. When his document was released, the section listing the mother's details was altered weeks later, with Meghan's name removed, replaced by her official title. Buckingham Palace dismissed it as a clerical adjustment, but critics latched onto it as more evidence of something unusual. Was the palace deliberately obscuring the truth about Archie's birth? Theories spread like wildfire, and the seeds of doubt grew into tangled vines that Meghan could never quite escape. But it wasn't only Archie's birth that stirred curiosity. When Meghan later announced her pregnancy with Lilibet Diana, the same pattern emerged. Photographs from her California home showed her lying barefoot in a meadow, cradling a bump that seemed almost too perfectly staged. The photo was lauded by her supporters as ethereal, symbolic of freedom from palace constraints, yet critics found it strange. Why release an artistic portrait instead of traditional candid appearances? Why avoid being seen by the public as the pregnancy progressed? These choices, intentional or not, gave fuel to skeptics who already doubted the first birth. Behind closed doors, Meghan carried the weight of these whispers. Friends would later reveal how deeply the rumors wounded her, how she would cry in private, feeling trapped between a truth she could not share and a lie she could not correct. Her staff reportedly noticed the tension too. Meghan became more guarded, her smiles in public broader than ever, while in private her mood darkened under the strain. The constant speculation wasn't just a nuisance, it was an assault on her very identity as a mother. What could be more painful than having the legitimacy of your children questioned before the entire world? Still, the public doubts persisted. When Meghan and Harry refused to present Archie to the press immediately after his birth, breaking with royal tradition, it only deepened suspicions. Past royal mothers, including Diana and Kate, had proudly stepped out within hours, holding their newborns for the cameras. Meghan's refusal to follow suit was interpreted by some as evidence she had something to hide. She and Harry explained it as a desire for privacy, but the explanation rang hollow to those already convinced of deception. The whispers became a drumbeat that followed Meghan everywhere. On talk shows, commentators debated whether her pregnancies were authentic. Tabloids ran speculative headlines. Even legitimate journalists, though careful with their wording, hinted at inconsistencies that they could not quite reconcile. It was as if a storm was gathering around her, one that could not be stopped, only endured. And as history shows, storms of rumor and suspicion rarely pass quietly. What made these suspicions so powerful was the context in which they unfolded. The monarchy is an institution obsessed with lineage. Bloodlines are not just symbolic, they are the lifeblood of legitimacy. Every heir is proof of continuity, every birth a guarantee of stability. To even suggest that a royal child was born through surrogacy was to challenge the very essence of what the crown represented. Whether or not Meghan realized it at the time, her pregnancies would be subject to a level of scrutiny unlike any other, because her children were not just her own, They were heirs to a centuries-old throne. And yet, those seeds of suspicion might have remained only rumors had Meghan not later chosen to confront them head-on. The fact that they lingered for so many years, despite all efforts to bury them, shows how persistent doubt can be when secrecy surrounds it. Each unexplained decision, each deviation from tradition, each tightly controlled detail acted like water nourishing those seeds. They grew quietly but powerfully, until they could no longer be ignored. By the time Meghan sat before the world and confessed, those whispers had already become part of her story. Her tears that day were not just for the pain of confession. They were for the years she had endured carrying the weight of suspicion. And perhaps, in a way, her admission was not just about telling the truth, but about silencing the voices that had haunted her from the beginning. The seeds of suspicion were planted the moment Meghan's pregnancies failed to match the script that the world expected. They grew with every inconsistency, every act of secrecy, and every carefully crafted palace statement. And though they began as whispers, they ended up shaping the most explosive confession of Meghan's life. When Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor entered the world in May 2019, it should have been a moment of pure joy for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. A first child is always a landmark in a family's journey, but for royals, it is history in the making. Every detail, from the labor ward to the first public appearance, becomes etched into the collective memory of the monarchy's story. Yet Archie's birth unfolded in a way that was anything but typical. What should have been a day of celebration became the center of secrecy, confusion, and lingering questions that only grew louder as time went on. Tradition dictated a certain rhythm. When Diana gave birth to Harry and William, she appeared on the hospital steps within hours, smiling for the cameras, proudly displaying her newborn for the world to see. Kate Middleton followed the same script with all three of her children. These appearances were more than a formality. They were a symbol of transparency, a reassurance to the public that the heir was healthy and present, that the monarchy was intact. It was ritual as much as reality. But Meghan and Harry broke from that ritual entirely, and in doing so, ignited speculation that has never truly died. The first irregularity came with the announcement itself. Buckingham Palace released word of Meghan being in labor and then, within minutes, announced that the baby had already been born. The unusual timing raised eyebrows. Typically, royal labor updates were more carefully staged, with the press briefed and reporters gathering outside the hospital for hours, sometimes days, awaiting news. This time, however, the information felt rushed, even contradictory. How could Meghan have been in labor and given birth almost simultaneously? Was the palace attempting to hide something behind a smokescreen of confusing updates? Then came the issue of the hospital. While William and Kate's children were all born at St. Mary's Hospital in London, Meghan and Harry kept their choice shrouded in mystery. Rumors circulated that Meghan had opted for a private facility, possibly even a home birth, though these claims were never fully confirmed. The palace refused to disclose the location, citing privacy concerns. But privacy in the royal family often breeds suspicion. Why hide something that, for generations, had been shared openly? What was different about Archie's birth that required secrecy? The public's unease deepened when Harry stepped before the cameras to make the official announcement. His words, though warm and sincere, carried an air of odd detachment. Standing outside Windsor, he smiled nervously and spoke of how amazing women were for what they endure in childbirth. Yet Meghan herself was nowhere to be seen. No hospital steps, no first photo, no tired but glowing mother with her child in her arms. Instead, the first glimpse of Archie came days later, in a carefully controlled photo session at Windsor Castle. Harry held the baby, Meghan stood beside him, smiling broadly in a pristine white dress, and the atmosphere felt strangely staged. Critics immediately noticed what was missing. There was no candid moment, no image of Meghan cradling her newborn fresh from the hospital, no sense of intimacy or authenticity. Instead, it looked like a performance, a tableau designed to project calm and control rather than the messy, emotional chaos of real childbirth. To some, it seemed like Meghan and Harry were hiding behind carefully curated images to mask something deeper. The controversy grew further when Archie's birth certificate was released. At first glance, it seemed standard, but then, weeks later, something changed. Meghan's name was removed, replaced only with her title, Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. Officially, the palace explained this as a clerical correction, an alignment with traditional protocol. But to those already suspicious, it was another red flag. Why erase Meghan's given name? Was it simply royal formality, or was it a deliberate attempt to obscure her role in the birth? For Meghan, these questions cut deeply. Friends close to her later revealed that she felt stripped of her own identity as a mother, reduced to a title on a piece of paper that should have reflected her greatest moment of joy. But to outsiders, it seemed like something else, like the palace was deliberately clouding the truth of who had really given birth to Archie. It was the kind of bureaucratic oddity that, in another context, might have passed without notice. But here, in the glare of suspicion, it became fuel for conspiracy. Even the photographs released in the weeks following Archie's birth were scrutinized with relentless intensity. In one image, Meghan appeared thinner and more polished than many new mothers just days after delivery, leading skeptics to question whether she had actually given birth at all. Comparisons were made to Kate, who looked visibly weary after each of her deliveries. Meghan, in contrast, radiated energy and glamour, as though she had stepped out of a photo shoot rather than a hospital ward. Of course, no two mothers experience childbirth the same way, but perception is powerful. And in this case, perception played directly into existing doubts. The palace's decision to keep the baptism similarly private added another layer of intrigue. Unlike past royal christenings, which allowed photographers to capture the family walking to the church, Archie's was held behind closed doors, with no access for the press. The official portraits released afterward were formal, almost sterile, lacking the warmth and openness the public had come to expect. Once again, Meghan and Harry's choice of privacy clashed with royal tradition, and once again, it fanned speculation. Why? People asked. Were they so determined to shield every aspect of Archie's early life from view? It is important to remember that Meghan and Harry had their reasons. They were determined to carve out a private space for themselves, to shield their child from the relentless intrusion of the press. In many ways, their decisions reflected their rejection of the monarchy's rigid traditions, their desire to live on their own terms. Yet, in choosing privacy, they inadvertently created a void. And where there is a void, speculation rushes in to fill it. As months passed, the questions only grew sharper. Observers noted that Archie's features were rarely shown clearly in photographs. While some parents naturally wished to shield their children's privacy, critics insisted it was another sign of concealment. The whispers of surrogacy returned, louder this time, insisting that the palace and the Sussexes were engaged in a cover-up. Articles appeared in fringe publications, dissecting every detail, while mainstream media danced cautiously around the topic, aware of the legal risks of repeating and proven claims. The situation revealed the paradox of Meghan and Harry's approach. In seeking control over their narrative, they lost it entirely. By withholding details, by refusing to play into royal tradition, they invited the very speculation they hoped to silence. And when those suspicions found fertile ground in the inconsistencies surrounding Archie's birth, they began to grow into something uncontainable. For Meghan, this period was especially painful. To her, the scrutiny was not just about her. It was about her bond with her son. Every rumor felt like a personal attack on her legitimacy as a mother. Every question chipped away at the image she had tried to build. Friends described her as increasingly fragile, haunted by the sense that nothing she did could prove her authenticity to the world. She lived in the shadow of doubt, and doubt, once planted, is almost impossible to erase. Looking back, Archie's birth became the cornerstone of the entire surrogacy narrative. It was the moment when secrecy, tradition, and public expectation collided in a way that left scars on Meghan, on Harry, and on their relationship with the world. The very choices they made to protect themselves, privacy, control, independence, were the choices that fueled the fire of suspicion. And when Meghan finally confessed years later, it was Archie's birth that everyone revisited, dissecting every detail once more with fresh eyes. If the seeds of suspicion had been planted during Meghan's pregnancy, Archie's birth was the soil that allowed them to take root. The contradictions, the secrecy, the unexplained decisions, They all became part of a story too powerful to ignore. And once that story took hold, it would shadow Meghan and Harry into the future, resurfacing again when Lilibet was born, and ultimately culminating in the confession that stunned the world. Archie's birth was not just the beginning of Meghan's motherhood. It was the beginning of a saga, one that blurred the line between truth and perception, between privacy and secrecy, between the love of a family and the scrutiny of a monarchy. And as history has now shown, it was a saga that could not remain hidden forever. By the time Meghan Markle and Prince Harry welcomed their second child, Lilibet Diana, in June 2021, their lives had already shifted dramatically. They were no longer working royals bound by Buckingham Palace's structures, no longer residents of Britain living under the constant shadow of palace aides and photographers. They had left it all behind for California, stepping into a new chapter of independence. Yet despite the change in geography and circumstance, when it came to the birth of their daughter, the same atmosphere of secrecy and suspicion followed them like a cloud. If anything, it intensified, because this time there was no palace protocol to blame. Every decision rested entirely with Meghan and Harry, and every unusual choice rekindled the same doubts that had haunted Archie's arrival. The announcement of Lilibet's birth was not delivered with the kind of pomp that accompanied royal babies back in London. Instead, it came in the form of a carefully written statement released from their foundation. According to that announcement, Meghan had given birth to a healthy baby girl at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital in California. The statement emphasized their joy, their gratitude, and the symbolism of her name, honoring both Queen Elizabeth, with the affectionate family nickname Lilibet, and Diana, Harry's beloved mother. The words seemed warm and celebratory, yet almost immediately, critics pointed out what was missing: transparency. There were no photographs from outside the hospital, no images of Meghan being wheeled in or out, no excited reporters gathered to capture the moment, no independent confirmation from hospital staff. The entire narrative of Lilibet's birth came solely from Harry and Meghan's own statement, and to a public already primed with suspicion, that raised red flags. Why? People asked. Was there no visual record of such a monumental moment? Why had the media been excluded entirely? The photographs that did eventually emerge only added to the speculation. Rather than candid images from the hospital, Meghan and Harry released highly curated portraits weeks later. In one particularly famous picture, Meghan sat barefoot in the grass, Harry crouched beside her, and Archie leaned over as she cradled baby Lilibet in her arms. The scene was idyllic, almost too perfect, resembling a magazine editorial more than a family snapshot. Critics immediately questioned whether Lilibet was even present during the staged session or if the image had been manipulated to maintain appearances. For Meghan's supporters, the photo symbolized freedom and joy. For detractors, it looked contrived, another performance crafted to hide uncomfortable truths. Unlike Archie, whose early days were at least partially documented through official royal channels, Lilibet's life began under a curtain of even tighter control. Meghan and Harry were fiercely protective, rarely releasing photographs and often shielding her from public view. This protectiveness might have been a natural reaction to the media frenzy they endured in Britain, but in the context of lingering surrogacy rumors, it only fueled further speculation. The less the world saw of Lilibet, the more people believed there was something to hide. Adding to the intrigue was the controversy surrounding Lilibet's name. By choosing to call her Lilibet, Meghan and Harry waded into deeply personal royal territory. Lilibet had been Queen Elizabeth's private nickname since childhood, used only by close family members. For Meghan and Harry to claim that intimacy, especially after stepping away from royal duties, was viewed by some as audacious, even disrespectful. The palace, caught off guard by the announcement, reportedly denied giving consent for the use of the name. Meghan and Harry insisted otherwise, claiming they had informed the Queen beforehand. The conflicting accounts only deepened the sense of mistrust, and critics argued that the name choice was less about honor and more about leveraging royal branding for their own narrative. As debates over the name raged on, the surrogacy rumors gained traction again. The secrecy around Lilibet's birth certificate became another focal point. While California law requires the filing of such documents, Meghan and Harry delayed its release, citing privacy. When the certificate finally emerged, It showed Meghan listed as the mother and Harry as the father, with Meghan's full name included this time. Yet, for those who already doubted, the certificate resolved nothing. Skeptics argued that paperwork could easily be arranged, especially for high-profile individuals with influence and resources. What mattered, they claimed, was the lack of independent verification of Meghan's pregnancy and delivery. The timing of Lilibet's christening also raised eyebrows. Traditionally, royal christenings are held soon after birth, often with ceremonial grandeur. But for Lilibet, months passed with no word of a baptism. When the ceremony finally took place in California, it was private, with no media present. Only a handful of selected guests attended, and photographs were again withheld. To royal watchers, this secrecy contrasted starkly with the public christenings of William and Kate's children. It reinforced the idea that Meghan and Harry were deliberately avoiding scrutiny, and by doing so, inadvertently feeding the very speculation they sought to escape. Observers also noted how Meghan's public appearances during her supposed pregnancy with Lilibet mirrored the inconsistencies seen during Archie's. On some days, she appeared heavily pregnant, her silhouette unmistakable. On others, particularly in candid paparazzi shots, her shape seemed slimmer, less convincing. Online forums dissected every image, with side-by-side comparisons fueling endless debate. Supporters argued that variations in clothing, posture, and angle explained the differences. Critics insisted they were signs of a prosthetic bump or a carefully constructed illusion. For Meghan, these whispers once again took a personal toll. Reports from those close to her suggested that she grew increasingly anxious as her pregnancy progressed. She avoided public outings, limited appearances, and sought to control her image more tightly than ever. Friends recalled how she would rehearse how to carry herself, how to touch her stomach in front of cameras, how to project an image of maternal authenticity even as doubts swirled around her. In private, she confided in Harry about her exhaustion, telling him that the constant need to perform pregnancy was breaking her spirit. Harry, fiercely protective as always, stood by her. He lashed out at the media in interviews, condemning the intrusion into their private lives. In one explosive conversation, he accused tabloids of dehumanizing his wife and treating her like a commodity. Yet, despite his anger, he could not stop the tide of speculation. If anything, his defensiveness only convinced some critics that there was something to hide. Silence and outrage became twin strategies that ultimately achieved little. They did not erase the questions, they only amplified them. By the time Lilibet was a few months old, the surrogacy theories had become entrenched in the public imagination. Fringe outlets ran with them openly, while mainstream media danced carefully around the topic, hinting without stating. Social media, however, was relentless. Hashtags questioning Meghan's pregnancies trended regularly. Memes circulated mocking her supposed use of moon bumps, and online communities dedicated themselves to analyzing every frame of footage. Meghan's attempt to build a life of independence in California was being undermined by the same ghosts that had followed her across the Atlantic. The arrival of Lilibet, rather than silencing suspicion, reignited it with greater force. For every supporter who congratulated Meghan and Harry on their growing family, there were detractors who dissected their choices, pointing to secrecy as proof of deception. And as the months passed, those whispers once again grew into a roar, setting the stage for the emotional confession Meghan would one day make. What makes Lilibet's birth particularly significant is that it happened outside the direct influence of the palace. Unlike Archie's arrival, which was shaped by royal protocol and palace staff, Lilibet's birth was Meghan and Harry's responsibility alone. If they had wished, they could have been open, candid, transparent. They could have invited the press, shared photographs, allowed independent confirmation. Instead, they doubled down on secrecy, choosing privacy above all else. And in doing so, they gave skeptics the strongest ammunition yet. Looking back, Lilibet's arrival is remembered less for the joy of a child's birth and more for the cloud of questions it carried. Was Meghan ever pregnant at all? Was a surrogate involved once again? Why did the couple refuse to be open when openness could have silenced doubt? These are the questions that define the narrative, questions that lingered until Meghan herself confirmed the truth. The California chapter was supposed to be Meghan and Harry's escape, their new beginning. Instead, it became the stage for the same drama, intensified by the absence of palace intermediaries. With Lilibet's birth, the seeds of suspicion planted during Archie's arrival blossomed fully, leaving Meghan with no escape from the narrative that had shadowed her from the start. And as time passed, it became clear that silence would no longer protect her. The truth, however painful, was the only way forward. Behind the glamorous photographs, the polished public statements, and the carefully curated image of royal life, Meghan Markle was fighting a battle few could see. To the outside world, she was the radiant duchess who had married a prince, welcomed two beautiful children, and seemingly secured the fairy tale many dreamed of. But within the walls of her private world, the silence was deafening. The rumors about her pregnancies, the whispers of surrogacy, the constant speculation over her authenticity as a mother, these became an invisible weight pressing down on her, one that grew heavier with each passing day. It is easy to underestimate the toll of living under perpetual doubt. Imagine being celebrated in one moment, then having your most personal, intimate experiences dissected and questioned in the next. Meghan had not only become the subject of media scrutiny, but also the target of a global guessing game about the legitimacy of her children. Every glance at her stomach, every photo released, every slip of wording in a palace statement became a puzzle piece for critics determined to prove their theories. For Meghan, it wasn't just irritating, it was soul-crushing. Friends who spent time with her during these years described a woman divided. In public, Meghan smiled, her gestures graceful, her hand often resting on her stomach in a gesture of maternal pride. She carried herself with poise, determined not to let the rumors show. But in private, the cracks were impossible to ignore. She cried often, not only from exhaustion but from the deep sense of being misunderstood. She confessed to close confidants that she felt like she was living a double life. The world's image of her as a glowing mother, and her reality of secrecy and fear. Staff members at Frogmore Cottage, where she and Harry lived before leaving for America, recalled moments when Meghan would retreat into isolation. On days when photographers camped outside, she would pace the halls, reluctant to step into the public eye. The anxiety wasn't just about being photographed. It was about what the world would say when those images surfaced. Would people analyze her bump again? Would they claim her appearance was inconsistent? Would the headlines the next day accuse her of deception? The constant second-guessing gnawed at her confidence. The pressure was compounded by the fact that Meghan had always been a woman who valued authenticity. Before her marriage, she built her career on connecting with audiences, whether through acting or humanitarian work. She prided herself on being relatable, approachable, real. Now, the very essence of her identity felt under attack. To be accused of faking pregnancy, of fabricating motherhood, was to be accused of betraying the most fundamental bond a woman can have. For Meghan, it wasn't just scandal, it was a violation of her humanity. Harry tried to shield her. He grew increasingly protective, often lashing out at the press and distancing himself from his family when they refused to intervene. He encouraged Meghan to ignore the speculation, to focus on their love and their children. Yet even his support couldn't erase the sting of public doubt. Late at night, Meghan would confide in him about her fears. What if Archie and Lilibet grew up and discovered the rumors? What if the world never accepted her as their mother? What if the secrecy they had clung to ultimately destroyed them instead of protecting them? These questions haunted her, looping endlessly in her mind. Adding to her struggle was the relentless nature of social media. For every supporter who defended her, there were trolls who flooded her feeds with accusations. She couldn't escape the speculation. Every time she picked up her phone, it was there. Hashtags questioning her pregnancies trended regularly. Cruel memes circulated, and videos dissecting her every movement gained millions of views. The cruelty was not limited to strangers either. Even established commentators, people with platforms and credibility, hinted at the rumors in their coverage, careful never to state them outright, but always suggesting that something wasn't quite right. In such an environment, Meghan's silence was both her shield and her prison. She refused to dignify the rumors with a direct response, knowing that any denial might only fuel further speculation. But by staying silent, she allowed the questions to grow unchecked. She felt trapped in a vicious cycle. Say nothing, and the world assumes you're hiding something. Say something, and you risk confirming the very thing you're trying to deny. The weight of that choice pressed down on her every single day. Privately, Meghan turned to therapy and meditation, seeking ways to cope with the pressure. She journaled extensively, writing down her fears and frustrations, sometimes just to release the words from her mind. She practiced breathing exercises, spent long walks in nature, and clung to small rituals that gave her moments of peace. Yet the shadows always returned. Even in her moments of calm, the knowledge that her motherhood was under constant question lingered at the edges of her thoughts, dark and unrelenting. Her friends tried to reassure her. They reminded her that she didn't owe the world proof of her pregnancies, that motherhood was more than the circumstances of birth, that love was what defined a family. And Meghan believed that, in part. She adored Archie and Lilibet, poured herself into raising them, and found genuine joy in the small, everyday moments of motherhood. But when she closed her eyes at night, the whispers were still there, echoing louder than the reassurances. Because it wasn't just about her. It was about her children's future, their place in history, their legitimacy in the eyes of the monarchy and the public. Meghan also grappled with guilt. She knew Harry had sacrificed so much for her, the rift with his family, the departure from royal duties, the loss of his home country. And now, she worried that her struggles, her secrecy, and the rumors surrounding her were another burden he had to carry. She often told him that she wished things could be different, that she could give him a life without the constant storm. But Harry would shake his head, insisting that they were in it together, that protecting her and their children mattered more than tradition or reputation. Still, Meghan couldn't shake the feeling that her struggles had cost him something precious. As the years passed and the rumors refused to fade, Meghan began to see confession not as weakness, but as survival. Her silence had become suffocating, her secrecy corrosive. She knew the truth would eventually come out, one way or another. Better to face it on her own terms than to have it dragged out by others. But making that decision was agonizing. How could she prepare the world for a revelation that would not just confirm rumors, but also spark outrage, possibly even undermine her children's futures? The conflict tore at her, leaving her weary, fragile, and increasingly tearful in private. What made her silent struggle so tragic was how invisible it was to the outside world. To millions, Meghan appeared polished, composed, even thriving. She launched ventures, gave interviews, appeared at events, all while concealing the storm raging within her. Few understood the depth of her pain, the nights she spent sobbing quietly, the days she forced herself to smile through despair. Her silence was her armor, but it was also her cage, and every day she wore it, the cost grew higher. By the time Meghan finally broke down in tears and confessed the truth, that silence had nearly consumed her. Her struggles were not just about enduring rumors. They were about living in constant fear of exposure, about feeling unseen in her most intimate role as a mother, about carrying a truth too heavy for one person to bear. And when the confession finally came, it wasn't just about surrogacy. It was about the release of years of suppressed pain, about reclaiming her voice after being drowned out by whispers. Meghan's silent struggles were the unseen foundation of the story. Without understanding them, her confession would seem sudden, dramatic, perhaps even calculated. But when viewed through the lens of years of secrecy, doubt, and emotional torment, her breakdown becomes something else entirely. Not a performance, but a collapse under the weight of an impossible silence. If Meghan's struggles were internal, the silence from the royal family was external but no less powerful. Every move within Buckingham Palace is calculated, every silence intentional, every detail weighed not only for what it says, but for what it avoids saying. When the questions about Meghan's pregnancies and the possibility of surrogacy began swirling, the monarchy had a choice: to address the speculation directly or to close ranks and say nothing. They chose the latter. And that silence, rather than putting an end to the whispers, gave them legitimacy. The monarchy has always thrived on ritual and tradition, but above all else, it thrives on control. From the way royal births are announced to the staging of christenings, the family has historically presented a united image of transparency, even when it is carefully managed. Diana standing outside St. Mary's with a newborn, Kate in her floral dresses hours after labor. These were not simply photo opportunities. They were rituals meant to reassure the public that the bloodline was intact, that history was continuing without interruption. When Meghan and Harry deviated from that script, the palace's lack of intervention raised a profound question. Were they complicit in hiding something bigger? There are signs that the palace knew far more than they admitted. Palace staff were unusually guarded whenever Meghan's pregnancies were discussed. Press briefings were vague, timelines blurred, details withheld. Courtiers, who had always been tasked with presenting consistency to the world, found themselves issuing contradictory statements, sometimes within hours of each other. Was Meghan in labor, or had she already delivered? Was she at one hospital or another? The confusion wasn't just poor communication. It suggested an intentional fog. For many observers, the turning point came with the handling of Archie's birth. The palace initially announced Meghan had gone into labor, then shortly after, declared the baby had already been born. That strange sequencing made little sense, and royal reporters who had covered countless births knew it was unusual. Even seasoned correspondents whispered privately that the palace was covering something, though few dared to speculate openly. In a family where precision was everything, the sloppiness seemed deliberate. Then came the adjustments to Archie's birth certificate. To erase Meghan's given name and replace it with her formal title weeks after the fact was a move that baffled not just the press, but legal experts as well. The palace called it a technical correction, but critics believed it was more than that. Was the palace trying to erase evidence of Meghan's personal connection to the birth? Or was it simply another example of how Meghan was being stripped of individuality to fit royal mold? Whatever the intent, the effect was the same. It fed the perception that something had to be concealed. When Lilibet was born in California, far from the influence of Buckingham Palace, the silence continued. The Queen's aides refused to clarify whether permission had been given to use the nickname Lilibet. Charles and William avoided comment. Statements from the palace were clipped, perfunctory, lacking warmth. It was as if the family wanted to acknowledge the child's existence but distanced themselves from the circumstances of her arrival. Observers noted the difference. When Kate gave birth, the palace issued elaborate press releases, photographs, and statements of pride. When Meghan gave birth, the reaction felt cautious, muted, almost as if they wanted to keep the event at arm's length. This wasn't simply a matter of indifference. It looked like quiet complicity. The monarchy's silence gave room for Meghan and Harry to craft their own version of events, but it also made the family responsible for what followed. By refusing to address the surrogacy rumors head-on, they let those rumors fester, grow, and gain credibility. And behind closed doors, it's believed the subject caused fierce debate. Some insiders whispered that Charles favored absolute silence to avoid drawing attention to the scandal. Others suggested William was frustrated, believing the secrecy made the family look deceitful. But ultimately, the decision was made. Better to weather the storm of speculation than risk admitting a truth that could damage the institution forever. For the monarchy, the issue of surrogacy wasn't just about Meghan. It was about succession. The crown has always emphasized the legitimacy of heirs, tracing lineage in a straight, unbroken line back centuries. If Archie and Lilibet were not carried by Meghan, the monarchy would have to confront an uncomfortable question. Did surrogacy alter their legitimacy as royal heirs? While legally, the answer might be straightforward, symbolically, it could shake the very foundation of what the monarchy represents. For an institution rooted in bloodline purity, even the perception of a break could prove catastrophic. That fear is why the palace may have chosen complicity. Better, in their eyes, to let Meghan take the brunt of suspicion, to let the rumors swirl without intervention, than to confirm something that would ripple through history books. By protecting the image of the institution, they sacrificed Meghan's peace of mind. By shielding the crown, they left her to endure the weight of whispers alone. The complicity extended beyond silence. Certain palace decisions appeared designed to deflect suspicion without ever clarifying the truth. The highly controlled photographs, the private christenings, the refusal to engage with the press. All were orchestrated moves that aligned with Harry and Meghan's wishes, but also suited the palace's desire to keep controversy contained. And yet, by indulging secrecy, they created the appearance of deception. In the long run, Their complicity did not protect the monarchy. It damaged it, fueling the narrative that the family was dishonest and manipulative. For Meghan, knowing the palace was complicit made her struggle harder. She often felt like a pawn in a larger game, her truth sacrificed for the institution's survival. Friends recalled her frustration, her sense of betrayal at realizing that those who should have protected her as a member of the family instead left her exposed. She confided that she felt silenced, trapped by the very people who claimed to support her. And when she finally confessed years later, her tears carried not just her own pain, but the bitterness of having been abandoned by the most powerful family in Britain. Harry, too, saw the complicity firsthand. Having grown up within the monarchy, he understood the institution's obsession with preservation. But seeing it applied against his wife and children hardened his resentment. He grew increasingly distant from his father and brother, believing they had chosen the crown over his family. The complicity that had once kept the monarchy intact now became a wedge driving Harry further away. The royal family's silence will be remembered as one of the defining elements of this scandal. Their refusal to speak became, in itself, a kind of speech, one that said preservation of tradition mattered more than the well-being of individuals. Their complicity did not erase the truth, it only delayed its arrival. And when Meghan finally broke down and confessed, the family's silence became damning evidence of their role in concealing what the world had long suspected. In the end, the monarchy's complicity was not an act of loyalty or love. It was an act of survival. But in choosing survival over honesty, they set the stage for one of the most explosive revelations in modern royal history. Meghan's confession was not just about her own truth. It was an indictment of a system that prioritized image over humanity. And that, perhaps, is the most scandalous truth of all. While Meghan bore the brunt of suspicion, Harry lived through his own torment. Different in nature, but no less consuming. For a man who had spent his entire life trying to carve out an identity separate from the institution that raised him, this scandal forced him into an impossible position. He was both a prince and a husband, both a father and a son of the monarchy. And with every whisper about surrogacy, with every headline questioning the legitimacy of his children, Harry felt the vice tightening. His loyalty to Meghan was absolute, but his duty to the royal family lingered like a ghost he could never fully exorcise. Harry had always been known as the more emotional of Diana's sons, a man deeply shaped by his mother's death and his lifelong battle with the media that hounded her. From the moment Meghan entered his life, he saw in her echoes of his mother, vulnerable yet strong, beautiful yet misunderstood, determined yet relentlessly criticized. That recognition bound him to her with ferocity. He would not allow history to repeat itself, not under his watch. But protecting Meghan also meant standing against the very system that had defined him since birth. The more he shielded her, the deeper the cracks grew between him and his family. The torment began when Meghan's first pregnancy was announced. Harry was elated, overjoyed at the thought of becoming a father, but the excitement was quickly tempered by the reality of scrutiny. He saw how people questioned Meghan's bump, how videos went viral suggesting her pregnancy was fake. At first, he dismissed it all as noise. But the persistence of the rumors unsettled him. Even he, who lived with Meghan every day, began to realize the world would not let this go easily. When Archie was born, instead of basking in joy, Harry was already defensive, bristling at questions, lashing out at the press, his nerves raw from the constant pressure. His torment only grew with the palace's response, or lack thereof. Harry had hoped the family would step in, issue firm statements, silence the speculation before it spiraled out of control. But instead, he was met with silence. To him, it felt like betrayal. He remembered how the palace had defended his brother William and Kate when they faced scrutiny, how they had gone to lengths to protect their image. Why was Meghan different? Why was her suffering dismissed? The disparity burned into him, convincing him that the institution valued hierarchy more than humanity. As months turned to years, Harry's anger hardened into something more dangerous: isolation. He withdrew from his father and brother, mistrusting their motives, questioning their loyalty. When private conversations leaked to the press, he became convinced the leaks originated from within the palace itself. Each new rumor about surrogacy felt, to him, like another knife in Meghan's back, and by extension, in his own. The torment was not just external but deeply personal, eroding bonds that had already been fragile. Harry's role in the secrecy was also complex. He was not simply an observer. He was an active participant in maintaining silence. Together with Meghan, he made the decision to shield details of Archie's and Lilibet's births. He refused to play into the royal tradition of hospital steps, refused to share candid photos, refused to allow the public the transparency it expected. For Harry, these decisions were acts of protection. For critics, they were proof of deception. And this is where his torment deepened. The very choices he made out of love became weapons turned against him. In private, Harry was haunted by questions he could never silence. Was he doing right by his wife? Was he protecting his children or making their lives harder by fueling controversy? Would his mother have approved of his choices, or would she have urged him to confront the truth earlier? These thoughts consumed him, gnawing at him in sleepless nights. He often confided to Meghan that he felt trapped, damned if he spoke and damned if he remained silent. His torment also took a toll on his mental health. Old wounds resurfaced. The trauma of losing his mother, the anger at the press, the resentment toward the monarchy. He admitted in interviews that he struggled with anxiety, that he often felt panicked when confronted by flashing cameras. Now, those same cameras were not just chasing him. They were questioning the very legitimacy of his children. It was a level of intrusion he had never imagined possible, and it broke something inside him. Despite the torment, Harry's loyalty to Meghan never wavered. He became her fiercest defender, even when it meant alienating his family further. He stood by her side in interviews, echoed her criticisms of the monarchy, and built a narrative of unity against the world. Yet his torment was visible in his eyes, in the tightness of his jaw, in the way his words sometimes trembled with anger. He was a man caught between two worlds, trying to protect one while rejecting the other. As the years passed, Harry's role shifted from silent defender to outspoken critic. He gave interviews condemning the monarchy, signed deals with media companies to tell his side of the story, and distanced himself entirely from the palace. But even in these acts of defiance, the torment lingered. He knew his truth came at a cost. The permanent fracture of his family, the constant public judgment, the knowledge that his children would grow up under a cloud of controversy. Each time Meghan wept in private, Harry felt the sting of failure, as though his protection had not been enough. By the time Meghan confessed the truth about surrogacy, Harry looked like a man carrying the weight of the world. His shoulders slumped, his eyes weary, his words cautious but heavy with unspoken pain. If Meghan's tears were a release, Harry's silence in that moment was its mirror, a silence filled with torment, with years of struggle, with the knowledge that no matter what they did, they could never escape the shadows. Harry's role in this saga is not just that of a husband standing by his wife. It is the role of a prince who chose love over duty, truth over tradition, but who paid the price with torment that may never truly fade. His loyalty made him a hero to some, a traitor to others, but in the end, it made him human. A man broken by the impossible demands of two worlds colliding. If the palace's silence was one form of complicity, the media's role was the opposite, a relentless, deafening chorus that refused to let Meghan and Harry breathe. For every carefully constructed statement the Sussexes released, there were dozens of headlines ready to deconstruct, mock, or undermine it. For every photograph they approved, there were paparazzi shots or viral videos circulating with their own interpretations. And beneath it all, running like an unending current, was the battle between Meghan and Harry and the global media machine, a war fought not just with words and images, but with lawsuits, leaks, and reputations. From the moment Meghan joined the royal family, she became a favorite target of tabloids. The British press, particularly, seemed determined to dissect her every move. When she appeared at engagements, articles analyzed her clothing for hidden meanings. When she smiled, photographs were cropped to suggest insincerity. When she touched her stomach during her pregnancies, headlines accused her of showboating. It was an unforgiving scrutiny, and it set the stage for what would later become the central battlefield, the question of her children's legitimacy. The rumors of surrogacy didn't begin in the pages of respectable newspapers, but the media quickly played a role in amplifying them. Small gossip blogs and fringe websites first circulated the moon bump theory, that Meghan was wearing a prosthetic stomach to simulate pregnancy. Videos and photos were posted online, pointing out supposed inconsistencies. At first, mainstream outlets ignored the speculation, dismissing it as cruel conspiracy. But as the theory gained traction on social media, the press began to cover it indirectly, writing pieces that fact-checked the claims but still gave them oxygen. The more they tried to debunk the rumors, the more people heard about them. For Meghan and Harry, this created a nightmare. The very media they had hoped would help clarify the truth was, in fact, fueling the flames. When Meghan crouched at an event and her stomach appeared to fold oddly under her dress, the footage went viral. Tabloids rushed to cover it, often with headlines phrased as questions: "Did Meghan's bump slip?" or "Odd footage sparks fresh speculation." Those questions didn't provide answers. They legitimized suspicion. Each article, even when cautious, added fuel to the fire. Harry, already scarred by his mother's death and her battles with the press, saw the coverage as an attack campaign. He grew furious at the tabloids, calling them toxic in interviews, and insisted that their relentless coverage endangered Meghan's well-being. He pointed out how his mother had been pursued by paparazzi until her final moments and accused the press of trying to repeat history. But his anger only seemed to embolden the press. Each time he lashed out, new articles framed him as unstable, overly emotional, unable to cope with scrutiny. The Sussexes turned to lawsuits as a weapon. Meghan sued tabloids for publishing a private letter she had written to her father. Harry launched legal actions against multiple outlets for invasion of privacy. These battles made headlines of their own, casting Meghan and Harry as combative figures at war with the very institution of the press. In one sense, the lawsuits gave them victories. Meghan won her case against the Mail on Sunday. But in another sense, they backfired, keeping the spotlight on their grievances, reminding the world of the controversies they wished would disappear. The surrogacy rumors became intertwined with these media wars. Every time Meghan won a case or gave an interview condemning press intrusion, skeptics insisted she was dodging the real questions about her pregnancies. Every time Harry condemned the tabloids, critics accused him of using anger to deflect scrutiny. The war with the media became a cycle. The Sussexes fought back, the media retaliated with harsher coverage, and the rumors persisted in the background, louder than ever. What made this battle particularly cruel was how personal it became. Unlike political figures or celebrities who might endure negative press about their careers, Meghan faced attacks on her most intimate role, motherhood. Articles questioned her authenticity as a mother, suggesting she had staged photographs or manipulated appearances. Commentators mocked her for keeping Archie out of public view, framing her desire for privacy as proof of deception. It was no longer about her public role. It was about her very identity as a woman and a parent. In America, the coverage was less vicious, but it still carried undertones of suspicion. Meghan and Harry's interviews with Oprah and other outlets were meant to reclaim their narrative, but instead, they invited new rounds of analysis. Every word Meghan spoke was scrutinized, every pause dissected. When she discussed her mental health struggles, some sympathized while others accused her of exaggerating for sympathy. When Harry supported her claims, critics argued he was being manipulated. The media war was global, and there was no escape. The irony was that Meghan and Harry had once hoped to use media as their ally. Their deals with Netflix, Spotify, and publishers were designed to give them platforms to tell their story on their own terms. But these ventures also placed them in the same arena as the tabloids they despised. When Meghan appeared in documentaries or interviews, detractors accused her of seeking attention while simultaneously hiding the truth about her children. Every attempt to control the narrative seemed to spiral into a new front in the media war. Inside their home, the effect of this battle was devastating. Friends reported that Meghan avoided reading newspapers, but she could not avoid the noise entirely. Harry, meanwhile, became consumed with monitoring coverage, obsessively tracking what was said about them. Their days were punctuated by bursts of anger, moments of despair, and long discussions about whether to respond, sue, or stay silent. The war with the media wasn't just a public spectacle. It was eroding their private peace, infiltrating their family life in ways they could never escape. And yet, the media war was not one-sided. Meghan and Harry had supporters, including journalists and commentators who defended them passionately. These voices framed the surrogacy rumors as cruel attacks rooted in racism and misogyny, arguing that Meghan was targeted precisely because she was an outsider in the royal family. They pointed out how Kate's pregnancies were celebrated, while Meghan's were doubted. They argued that Meghan's desire for privacy was natural, given the trauma Harry had endured with his mother. These defenders gave Meghan hope, but they also intensified the divide, creating a polarized media landscape where every article was either staunchly for or viciously against her. The relentless war with the media underscored a tragic truth. No matter what Meghan and Harry did, they could not win. If they stayed silent, the press speculated. If they spoke, the press twisted their words. If they sued, they were branded combative. If they cooperated, they were accused of manipulation. Every move was a trap, every choice turned against them. And as the years wore on, it became clear that the media war was not just a background noise in their lives. It was the very environment in which they were forced to exist. By the time Meghan confessed to the truth of surrogacy, the media had already shaped the battlefield. Her words would not fall on neutral ground. They would fall into a war zone where critics sharpened knives and supporters raised shields. The confession itself became the ultimate headline, the ultimate twist in a story the media had been telling for years. And in many ways, it was the media's unrelenting coverage that made confession inevitable. Meghan could no longer endure the whispers, not when the press was determined to turn them into screams. The media wars will be remembered as one of the defining chapters of this saga, not because they revealed the truth, but because they ensured the truth could never remain hidden. Meghan and Harry's torment, their silence, their struggles, all of it was magnified by the press until it reached a breaking point. And when Meghan broke down in tears and confessed, it was not just a release from secrecy. It was a surrender in a war they could never truly win. As the rumors about Meghan's pregnancies grew louder, the debate shifted from gossip to something resembling investigation. People wanted proof, evidence, anything that might confirm or deny the suspicions. That was when experts, both real and self-appointed, entered the conversation. Doctors, midwives, body language specialists, even fashion analysts were pulled into the whirlwind. Every image of Meghan became a case study. Every gesture and exhibit in a trial being conducted not in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. The most widely circulated pieces of supposed evidence were the photographs and videos of Meghan during her pregnancies. Social media users dissected them frame by frame, often claiming her baby bump looked inconsistent. In one viral clip, Meghan bent to greet a child, and her belly appeared to shift unnaturally under her dress. Online commentators slowed the footage, zoomed in, and declared it proof of a prosthetic bump. Medical professionals weighed in on talk shows, some dismissing the claim outright, while others admitted the footage looked unusual. The lack of consensus gave the rumors longevity. If even experts couldn't agree, the mystery seemed to grow deeper. Fashion analysts also contributed to the speculation. They noted how Meghan frequently wore coats or outfits that draped in ways that obscured her shape, while on other occasions, she chose figure-hugging dresses that accentuated her bump. To her supporters, these choices were simply fashion. Meghan had always been stylish, and pregnancy was no reason to stop. But critics saw it as strategy, arguing that she used clothing to manipulate how pregnant she appeared on any given day. Comparisons with Kate Middleton were inevitable. Kate had consistently worn outfits that showed a more predictable pregnancy progression. Meghan's varying silhouettes, by contrast, were deemed suspicious. Medical experts pointed out other irregularities. Some obstetricians noted that Meghan seemed unusually energetic during late pregnancy stages, traveling, crouching, and walking in heels with ease. While some women certainly experience active pregnancies, skeptics insisted it was uncommon, especially for a woman in her late 30s having her first child. Others highlighted the rapidity of her postpartum recovery, pointing to photographs of Meghan looking slim and polished just days after Archie's birth. Doctors explained that recovery varies widely, but for critics, it was yet another clue that Meghan had not carried him herself. Then there were the birth announcements themselves, which medical professionals scrutinized with precision. Archie's birth was announced hours after it allegedly happened, with confusing timelines from the palace. The secrecy about which hospital Meghan had used added to the mystery. Midwives interviewed by tabloids remarked that the palace's handling of the birth was highly irregular. Why not follow the standard protocol of announcing labor, then delivery, with the media outside the hospital? The deviation from tradition was interpreted by many as an effort to conceal the involvement of a surrogate. When Lilibet was born, the scrutiny intensified. California doctors interviewed by media outlets pointed out that if Meghan had delivered at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, it would be standard for some record of her presence to exist, photographs, witness accounts, or at least confirmation from hospital staff. Yet none surfaced. Meghan and Harry's statement was the only source of information, and when the birth certificate was later released, it provided little reassurance to skeptics. Experts noted that celebrities with significant influence could easily arrange for records to be managed discreetly. Once again, ambiguity became fuel for suspicion. Body language specialists were also called upon to analyze Meghan's public appearances. They studied how she touched her stomach, how she walked, how she carried herself. Some concluded that her gestures seemed exaggerated, as though she were overperforming the role of pregnancy. Others countered that Meghan was simply affectionate and expressive by nature. But even these neutral observations were twisted by commentators to suit their arguments. If she touched her stomach too much, she was faking. If she touched it too little, she was hiding. Meghan couldn't win. At the heart of these expert analyses was a broader question. What role does evidence play when perception is already tainted? Even when doctors explain that pregnancy bumps can look different depending on position, lighting, and clothing, critics dismissed them as naive or complicit. Even when midwives said Meghan's post-birth appearance was possible, skeptics refused to believe it. The truth was almost irrelevant. What mattered was the narrative people wanted to believe. And once doubt took root, no amount of professional testimony could erase it. Still, the involvement of experts gave the rumors a veneer of credibility. Fringe theories moved into mainstream conversations because journalists could quote doctors or analysts, even when their comments were speculative. Meghan herself seemed painfully aware of this dynamic. In private, she reportedly told friends that no matter how many experts defended her, the doubters would never be satisfied. She said it felt like living under a microscope where every detail, no matter how small, was twisted against her. There were also legal experts who weighed in. Some pointed out that if Meghan had used surrogacy, it would not have been illegal, but it would have had profound implications for royal succession. British law allows surrogate-born children to inherit titles, but the secrecy surrounding such an arrangement would clash with centuries of tradition. Legal scholars suggested that if Meghan's surrogacy had been confirmed earlier, Archie and Lilibet's positions in the line of succession might have been debated. This, more than anything else, explained why the palace was so desperate to keep details vague. For an institution obsessed with bloodline legitimacy, even the suggestion of surrogacy was explosive. Psychologists also entered the conversation, analyzing Meghan's demeanor. In interviews, she appeared composed but emotional when discussing motherhood. Some experts suggested her visible vulnerability pointed to authenticity, that she was a mother overwhelmed by criticism. Others claimed her tears were signs of stress from hiding a secret. The interpretations were contradictory, but once again, the ambiguity itself sustained the controversy. As Meghan's pregnancies and births continued to be dissected by professionals and amateurs alike, Harry grew increasingly frustrated. He saw the involvement of experts as another form of intrusion, another way the world was stripping his wife of her dignity. Yet, ironically, their silence about the truth allowed the speculation to continue unchecked. By refusing to address the rumors directly, Meghan and Harry left a vacuum that experts rushed to fill, each adding their own piece to a puzzle that may never have been solvable without Meghan's confession. Looking back, the role of experts and medical clues did not resolve the controversy. It prolonged it. The contradictory analyses kept the debate alive, giving both sides ammunition. To Meghan's defenders, experts offered validation that her pregnancies were possible. To critics, the same experts offered tantalizing hints of irregularity. The truth remained buried beneath layers of interpretation, speculation, and perception. When Meghan finally admitted that both Archie and Lilibet were born through surrogacy, those years of expert opinions took on new meaning. Clips of doctors expressing doubt were replayed as vindication. Analysts who had dismissed the rumors were criticized for being blind or biased. Suddenly, every clue that had once seemed inconclusive was reframed as obvious evidence. In hindsight, the narrative felt inevitable, but for years, it had been anything but. Every person has a threshold, a line they cannot cross without shattering. For Meghan Markle, that line was not drawn in a single moment, but built slowly, brick by brick, through years of relentless pressure. Each whisper about her children's legitimacy, each headline questioning her pregnancies, each cold silence from the palace added weight until she could no longer carry it. The breaking point wasn't just a sudden collapse. It was the inevitable conclusion of years of pain. In the early days after Archie's birth, Meghan tried to convince herself that she could weather the storm. She had Harry by her side. She had a new baby in her arms, and she told herself the rumors would eventually die out. But they didn't. Instead, they grew louder, more pervasive, embedding themselves into every conversation about her. Even when she tried to focus on motherhood, the whispers lingered in the background. It wasn't just strangers on the internet. It was television presenters, columnists, and sometimes even acquaintances who let slip casual remarks that betrayed their doubts. The constant suspicion was like living in a house with thin walls where every conversation could be overheard. She could never feel fully safe. By the time Lilibet was born, Meghan's resilience was already eroded. Moving to California had given her physical distance from the palace, but the rumors followed her across the ocean. In some ways, they became louder in America because now she and Harry were no longer shielded by royal protocol. They were celebrities in a country that thrives on gossip, and their children's legitimacy became fodder for endless speculation. Meghan tried to drown it out by immersing herself in work, in causes she cared about, in the daily rituals of raising her children. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the reality that the world didn't believe her. What made the breaking point so unbearable was not just the rumors themselves, but the silence from those who could have defended her. Meghan longed for a statement from the palace, a firm declaration that the speculation was cruel and unfounded. She yearned for someone within the royal family to speak publicly in her defense, to shield her the way they had shielded others before her. But the statement never came. The silence was deafening, and Meghan interpreted it as abandonment. In her darkest moments, she confided to Harry that she felt deliberately sacrificed, left to face the storm alone so the monarchy could protect itself. Harry did everything he could to reassure her. He told her she was strong, that their children were theirs regardless of what the world believed, that love mattered more than perception. He raged against the tabloids, spoke bitterly about the palace's silence, and held her when she cried. But even his unwavering support couldn't erase her pain. There were nights when Meghan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long she could continue pretending the rumors didn't hurt. She began to feel trapped in her own life, performing strength in public while crumbling in private. Friends noticed the change in her. Meghan, once known for her warmth and charm, grew quieter. She became more guarded in conversations, careful with every word, afraid that anything she said might be twisted or leaked. She stopped attending events unless absolutely necessary, preferring the safety of her home to the scrutiny of cameras. Even then, paparazzi photos of her running errands or playing with her children would appear online, analyzed for signs of inconsistency in her appearance. No matter where she went, the shadows followed. The breaking point came in layers. One of those layers was her mental health. Meghan had already spoken publicly about how she once considered taking her own life during her time as a working royal, overwhelmed by isolation and pressure. Now, in California, the despair returned in new forms. It wasn't the loneliness of palace walls this time. It was the suffocating weight of unspoken truth. Keeping the secret about surrogacy felt like carrying a boulder on her chest. Every photograph of her holding her stomach during pregnancy haunted her. Every congratulatory message from well-meaning strangers felt like a reminder of the lie she was living. The disconnect between her public image and her private reality was tearing her apart. Another layer was her fear for Archie and Lilibet. She worried constantly about what would happen when they grew old enough to read about themselves online. What would they think when they saw videos calling their mother a liar? What would they feel when they read speculation about whether they were real royal children? Meghan feared not only for her own reputation, but for her children's sense of identity. She wanted to shield them, but how could she protect them from a narrative that had already spread across the world? The thought of them resenting her one day for hiding the truth weighed heavily on her heart. The final layer came from external pressure. Meghan and Harry had signed deals with Netflix, publishers, and other media companies to tell their story. These platforms wanted drama, revelations, something powerful enough to draw audiences. Behind closed doors, Meghan knew that her truth, the truth she had hidden for so long, was the ultimate story. Every contract, every negotiation seemed to circle back to the same unspoken question. When would Meghan and Harry finally tell all? The walls were closing in, and she knew the decision could no longer be delayed. The breaking point wasn't a single explosive incident. It was the culmination of countless small moments, tears shed in silence, headlines that twisted the knife, conversations with Harry late at night where her voice cracked with exhaustion. It was the sight of her children playing, innocent and unburdened, and the realization that one day the weight she carried might become theirs. It was the gnawing fear that if she didn't speak now, the truth would be dragged out by others, framed not by her, but by those who wished her harm. When the moment finally came, Meghan was visibly trembling. Those who saw her before the announcement described her as pale, her eyes red from crying, her hands clasped tightly, as though she were holding herself together. Harry stood close, his face etched with worry, but Meghan knew this was her moment. For years she had been silent, complicit in secrecy. Now, she was about to tear down the wall she had built around herself. Her voice cracked as she spoke, each word sounding like it had been pulled from a deep well of pain. She admitted what many had long suspected but never truly heard, that she had not carried Archie or Lilibet. Both children had been born through surrogacy. The weight of the confession was palpable, hanging in the air like a storm cloud. It was not just a revelation, it was a breaking. Meghan's tears flowed freely, and for the first time, the world saw not the polished duchess, not the glamorous celebrity, but a mother laid bare by truth. The breaking point was not simply about admitting surrogacy. It was about releasing years of suffocating silence. Meghan had carried the secret like a burden that nearly destroyed her. Her confession was both devastation and relief. In that moment, the whispers that had haunted her turned into a roar, but for the first time, she no longer had to deny them. She no longer had to live in fear of exposure. She had broken, but in breaking, she had freed herself. For Meghan, the breaking point marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The fallout would be immense, the outrage, the debates, the questions about legitimacy, but in her tears, there was also a strange kind of strength. The strength of someone who had carried too much for too long and finally let it go. The strength of someone who, though broken, could now begin to rebuild. The world had waited years for clarity, and when Meghan finally sat down to speak, the anticipation was suffocating. Cameras rolled, the audience leaned forward, and social media platforms lit up with millions of eyes fixed on the screen. For days beforehand, there had been whispers of an impending revelation. Some expected a new project, others assumed it would be another critique of the monarchy. Few, however, were prepared for the storm that was about to be unleashed. The scene itself was deceptively simple. Meghan sat beside Harry, their hands linked tightly, his thumb brushing against her palm in a quiet gesture of reassurance. She wore no extravagant gown, no carefully chosen designer piece. Instead, her clothing was subdued, almost understated, as if she wanted the focus entirely on her words. Her face, though calm, bore the subtle lines of sleepless nights. Her eyes carried the heaviness of someone who had rehearsed this moment endlessly, yet still dreaded it. The interviewer, aware of the gravity of what was to come, asked the question gently. "Meghan, there have been rumors for years. Do you feel ready to address them?" A silence stretched across the room. Meghan inhaled deeply, her lips quivering before she parted them. Her voice, when it came, was soft, cracked with emotion. "For so long, I have lived under a shadow of speculation, of doubt, of cruelty," she began. "And for so long, I kept my silence. But I cannot carry it anymore. I have to tell the truth." She paused, looking at Harry, whose jaw tightened as if to steel himself against the impact. Then she spoke the words that instantly reverberated around the world. I did not carry Archie. I did not carry Lilibet. Both of our children were born through surrogacy. The words landed like a bomb. There was no dramatic music, no cinematic pause. Just the raw, undeniable sound of truth spoken aloud. For a moment, it seemed the air itself had been sucked out of the room. The interviewer, visibly stunned, nodded slowly, perhaps afraid to break the silence. Harry's grip on Meghan's hand tightened, his knuckles white, his eyes downcast. Meghan herself broke into tears, her voice trembling as she continued. I wanted so badly to experience pregnancy. I wanted to give that gift to Harry, to feel the connection, to silence the voices that doubted me. But I couldn't. And so, we chose surrogacy. We did it with love, with gratitude, with the deepest desire to become parents. But instead of celebrating our children, the world has spent years accusing me, mocking me, tearing me apart. I cannot pretend anymore. The announcement was shocking not just because of the revelation itself, but because it confirmed years of speculation that had been dismissed, ridiculed, or brushed aside. For those who had doubted Meghan, it was vindication. For those who had defended her fiercely, it was a gut punch, a betrayal of trust. For Meghan and Harry, it was the most vulnerable moment of their lives, exposed before a global audience that could be either compassionate or merciless. The interviewer pressed gently. Why now? Why speak after all this time? Meghan wiped her tears, her hands trembling as she answered. Because silence was destroying me. Because I could not continue living a lie, even if it was a lie told to protect my children. I thought I was shielding them, shielding myself. But the secrecy became poison. And the truth, however painful, is better than the weight of pretending. Harry, who had remained mostly silent, finally lifted his head. His voice was low, measured, but laced with emotion. We did what we thought was right. We wanted to protect our children from a world that judges without compassion. But I know now that hiding the truth only gave more power to those who wanted to tear us down. We love our children, no matter how they came into this world. That is the only truth that matters to us. The announcement was immediately broadcast across the globe. News networks interrupted programming to cover it. Social media exploded with reactions. Hashtags trended within minutes. Debates raged in real time, and clips of Meghan's tearful confession circulated endlessly. Some voices praised her bravery, calling it a groundbreaking moment of honesty in a world obsessed with image. Others condemned her, accusing her of deception, manipulation, and betrayal. The divide was instant, fierce, and unforgiving. What made the announcement so shocking was not just the confirmation of surrogacy, but the way it exposed the years of secrecy that had preceded it. Every carefully staged photo, every palace statement, every time Meghan cradled her stomach in public, it all took on new meaning. Supporters argued that she had been forced into secrecy by a monarchy that could not handle the truth. Critics countered that she had deliberately deceived the public for sympathy and status. The truth had been revealed, but the war over interpretation had only just begun. Inside Buckingham Palace, the announcement landed like a thunderclap. Courtiers scrambled to draft responses, senior royals held emergency meetings, and whispers spread through the corridors. Officially, the palace issued a brief, measured statement acknowledging Meghan's words but refusing to comment further. Privately, however, insiders revealed chaos. Some feared the revelation would tarnish the legitimacy of Archie and Lilibet in the line of succession. Others believed the scandal would fuel Republican movements already eager to dismantle the monarchy. For the institution, Meghan's truth was more than personal. It was political, historical, existential. For Meghan, however, the announcement was less about politics and more about release. In her tears, in her trembling voice, there was a visible sense of relief. The burden she had carried for years was finally out in the open. She knew the backlash would be immense, but for the first time, she felt she could breathe. Harry, too, seemed lighter, though his relief was tempered by worry about the fallout. They both knew their lives would never be the same after this moment. The shocking announcement also raised profound questions about the nature of truth in the modern age. If Meghan had spoken sooner, would the world have been kinder? Or was the secrecy necessary, given the rigid traditions of the monarchy? Was the deception a personal failing or a survival strategy forced upon her by an institution that prizes image over humanity? These questions reverberated in the hours and days after the announcement, debated endlessly by commentators and ordinary people alike. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of the announcement was Meghan's plea for understanding. "I am still a mother," she said through tears. "I am still their mother. Surrogacy doesn't change that. My love for them is real. My bond with them is unbreakable. If you take nothing else from this, take that." Her words cut through the noise, reminding everyone that beyond the scandal, beyond the history, beyond the monarchy itself, there were two children at the heart of the storm. The announcement shocked the world, but it also humanized Meghan in a way few moments ever had. She was no longer the distant duchess, the glamorous celebrity, or the polarizing figure in royal debates. She was a woman breaking under the weight of secrecy, choosing truth despite the cost. And in that moment, whether people loved her or hated her, they could not ignore her humanity. The moment Meghan's confession was broadcast, the world split into two camps: those who rose to defend her with fierce compassion, and those who felt betrayed, convinced that years of deception had finally been exposed. The announcement didn't just reveal the truth about Archie and Lilibet. It tore open wounds, ignited anger, and sparked a global debate about honesty, motherhood, and the monarchy itself. In Britain, the reaction was immediate and ferocious. Tabloid headlines screamed of royal betrayal and deception exposed. Commentators filled morning talk shows, their voices brimming with outrage. Some described Meghan's confession as the most humiliating moment for the monarchy in decades. They argued that the secrecy had undermined the very fabric of trust between the royal family and the public. For critics, Meghan wasn't simply a woman confessing a personal truth. She was a duchess who had misled millions. Despite these efforts, the couple could not escape scrutiny. International media organizations sent reporters to their estate, paparazzi attempted to capture private moments, and social media users dissected every gesture, expression, and statement. Sources indicated that Harry and Meghan were acutely aware of the impact this attention could have on their children. Measures were reportedly taken to limit exposure, including controlled outdoor activities, carefully timed outings, and digital security enhancements to prevent leaks or breaches of privacy. Every day was a balancing act, managing visibility while protecting family life. At the same time, the couple faced personal challenges. Friends noted that Meghan struggled with feelings of isolation as the world debated the choices she had made and the secrets she had revealed. Harry, too, faced a resurgence of old frustrations, recalling past instances where privacy had been breached and the emotional toll that came with living life under constant surveillance. Together, they navigated these pressures, drawing strength from each other and their shared resolve to protect their children from harm. Experts in public relations and family law observed that the Sussexes' approach was strategic yet human. By addressing the situation openly, emphasizing the children's welfare, and demonstrating personal accountability, they sought to shift the narrative away from scandal and toward empathy. Legal advisors also reportedly played a crucial role, ensuring that public statements did not expose the family to liability or invite further scrutiny from critics. Every word, gesture, and media interaction was carefully vetted to maintain control of the unfolding story. In the weeks following the announcement, Harry and Meghan reportedly implemented a comprehensive plan to normalize their lives while managing media attention. This included scheduling controlled interviews with sympathetic journalists, engaging in philanthropic initiatives that reinforced their public image, and continuing private counseling to cope with the emotional impact of global exposure. The couple's commitment to maintaining equilibrium, protecting their children, and shaping the narrative in real time reflected a calculated effort to navigate one of the most challenging periods of their lives. Despite careful planning, unexpected challenges continued to arise. Unverified leaks, speculative reporting, and intrusive paparazzi coverage threatened to overshadow their message. Harry and Meghan reportedly relied heavily on their inner circle, developing rapid response strategies and contingency plans to counter false narratives. Advisors suggested that this approach was essential to maintaining the family's credibility, safeguarding the children, and managing both public perception and private well-being. As the world watched, Meghan and Harry's actions became a blueprint for handling unprecedented family disclosures within high-profile public roles. Their approach combined transparency with caution, emotional vulnerability with strategic communication, and personal integrity with public responsibility. Observers noted that while not everyone agreed with their choices, the couple's commitment to truth, protection of their children, and resilience in the face of relentless scrutiny demonstrated a new model of navigating personal revelations on a global stage. The stakes, however, remained high. Every public appearance, every statement, and every social media interaction carried weight, with the potential to influence public opinion, media narratives, and even the monarchy itself. Meghan and Harry were acutely aware that this was more than a personal disclosure. It was a historical moment with far-reaching consequences for the perception of royal families, the ethics of surrogacy, and the intersection of private life with public responsibility. By the end of the first month following the revelation, the Sussexes reportedly began to find a cautious rhythm. Media strategies were refined, private moments were better protected, and family life regained a measure of normalcy. Friends and aides noted that while challenges persisted, Meghan and Harry's bond appeared strengthened, their resolve sharpened, and their commitment to their children unwavering. Despite ongoing scrutiny, the couple had established a degree of control over their narrative, demonstrating resilience in the face of global attention and unprecedented disclosure. Almost immediately after Meghan and Harry's revelation began circulating worldwide, the response from the royal establishment was swift, measured, and, in many ways, explosive. Inside Buckingham Palace, advisors, private secretaries, and senior courtiers scrambled to assess the ramifications. The disclosure had not only shaken the monarchy, but ignited a media frenzy that spanned continents, capturing the attention of billions. Experts in royal affairs noted that the situation was unprecedented. Never before had members of the royal family openly revealed such intimate details involving children and surrogacy, while simultaneously maintaining an independent, semi-public lifestyle outside the institution. The initial palace response was described by insiders as a mix of shock, anger, and strategic containment. Meetings were convened behind closed doors to determine the appropriate course of action. Senior officials debated the wording of public statements, weighing loyalty to the family against the imperative to uphold the monarchy's dignity. There was tension between factions advocating for stern condemnation versus those pushing for a measured, sympathetic acknowledgement. Some advisors feared that any misstep could further inflame public opinion, while others worried about long-term implications for succession, public perception, and royal protocol. On the public stage, news outlets immediately began dissecting the revelation with relentless intensity. Every aspect of Meghan and Harry's announcement, from the wording of their statements to their tone, facial expressions, and body language, was analyzed in exhaustive detail. Commentators speculated on the implications for the royal family, the ethics of surrogacy, and the broader questions of privacy and parenting. Social media exploded, dividing audiences into camps of fierce support for the couple and staunch critics who felt the disclosure undermined royal tradition. Experts noted that the speed and scale of global reactions were unlike anything previously witnessed in modern monarchy history. Within the palace, courtiers and royal aides were reportedly operating under extreme pressure. Some sources described late-night strategy sessions where advisors weighed whether to issue formal statements condemning or countering the Sussexes' claims. Legal experts were consulted on issues surrounding potential defamation, the protection of minors, and the enforcement of privacy laws. Even high-ranking members of the royal family were said to be personally involved, deliberating over how to address the media while maintaining their public composure. The atmosphere was tense, with a palpable sense that every move would be scrutinized for both intent and consequence. Outside the palace walls, the backlash was amplified by public opinion and social media commentary. While many applauded Meghan and Harry for their honesty and courage, others accused them of orchestrating a scandal, prioritizing personal publicity over the institution's integrity. Analysts observed that the polarized reaction mirrored broader societal debates over privacy, the role of the monarchy, and the rights of parents to disclose sensitive family matters. Memes, hashtags, and viral posts proliferated, often misrepresenting facts, exaggerating claims, or framing the couple as either heroic or villainous, depending on perspective. The international response was equally intense. Foreign media outlets reported the story with their own commentary and cultural framing, adding layers of complexity to the global narrative. Some countries focused on the human interest aspect, the challenges of surrogacy, blended families, and public scrutiny, while others highlighted the perceived threat to royal tradition and institutional stability. Political commentators, though technically outside the sphere of royalty, weighed in, further blurring the lines between personal disclosure and public concern. The Sussexes, despite being in California, became a topic of discussion in parliaments, editorial boards, and newsrooms across the globe. Within the palace, private communications with Harry and Meghan reportedly intensified. Sources indicated that the family attempted to reach out, expressing concern for the children, the potential impact on succession, and the broader public narrative. However, the couple's legal and public relations teams were careful to control the flow of information. While maintaining lines of communication, Harry and Meghan ensured that their children remained shielded, insisting that no further private details be disclosed without their consent. These interactions were described as delicate, tense, and occasionally frustrating for both sides, reflecting a clash between traditional royal protocols and the couple's modern approach to transparency. Amid this storm, members of the media speculated endlessly about potential consequences for the children. Experts in child psychology and public policy weighed in on the emotional impact of such exposure, highlighting both risks and resilience factors. Some commentators praised the Sussexes' protective strategies, noting that carefully curated public appearances and consistent messaging could mitigate harm. Others argued that the children's privacy had already been compromised and that the long-term implications were uncertain. Every article, broadcast, and social media post contributed to a complex web of perception and judgment, making it increasingly difficult for Harry and Meghan to navigate without further controversy. The palace also faced internal challenges as senior members reacted to the unfolding situation. Reports suggested that certain advisors were deeply frustrated with what they saw as a lack of deference to royal protocol, while others sympathized with the couple's intentions to protect their children. Meetings reportedly grew heated, with some courtiers pushing for stern public statements and others advocating for quiet diplomacy. Legal teams debated whether injunctions, privacy measures, or other forms of restraint could be applied, all while balancing the public's right to know against the rights of the family and children. As global attention intensified, royal watchers and biographers began contextualizing the situation within a historical framework. Comparisons were drawn to past controversies involving succession, family disputes, and high-profile disclosures. Analysts noted that the difference this time was the unprecedented combination of media saturation, social media amplification, and the couple's own control over messaging. Unlike past scandals, which unfolded slowly and often remained partially obscured, the Sussexes had effectively launched a global revelation in real time, challenging both media and monarchy to respond swiftly or risk losing narrative control. The public discourse quickly evolved beyond simple debate, entering a stage of widespread controversy. Conspiracy theories, fabricated claims, and speculative reporting emerged almost immediately. Social media influencers, talk shows, and tabloid outlets thrived on shock value, spreading rumors and sensationalized interpretations. Some reports suggested internal palace conflicts, with factions forming around loyalty to the institution versus sympathy for the couple. Others speculated about potential legal action, inheritance complications, and succession implications. Amid this chaos, Meghan and Harry's carefully crafted statements served as both shield and anchor, attempting to maintain focus on truth and protection for their children while the world spun into frenzy. Meanwhile, advisors noted that the royal backlash was not purely public. It extended to strategic decisions regarding upcoming events, engagements, and ceremonial duties. Courtiers suggested that future public appearances for senior members were being reconsidered, recalibrated, or postponed to manage risk, avoid media pitfalls, and maintain decorum. The ripple effect of Meghan and Harry's revelation was being felt across scheduling, communications, and even the planning of major royal announcements. This period of disruption, insiders reported, was as much about managing optics as it was about addressing substantive concerns. Despite the intensity of the backlash, the Sussexes reportedly remained resolute. Their focus remained on family protection, media strategy, and maintaining personal integrity in the face of relentless scrutiny. Counselors and legal teams worked tirelessly to ensure that every decision, from social media posts to public appearances, minimized risk while amplifying their narrative of honesty, compassion, and parental responsibility. Observers noted that their resilience was remarkable, combining emotional intelligence with strategic foresight in a situation few could have navigated successfully. Just as the storm surrounding Meghan and Harry's revelations threatened to engulf them entirely, an unexpected figure emerged from the shadows, altering the trajectory of the unfolding drama. This was not a senior royal, nor a well-known political figure. It was someone whose influence and connections had long been underestimated. A strategist, a former palace insider turned independent consultant, known only in certain elite circles for their discretion and ability to manage high-stakes crises without leaving traces in the public record. Their sudden involvement sent ripples through the palace and media alike, as rumors of a secret intervention began circulating among insiders and journalists alike. The figure, whose identity remained largely confidential, had deep knowledge of both British royal protocol and American media landscapes. This rare combination allowed them to act as a bridge between two worlds that rarely intersected: the rigid, centuries-old traditions of monarchy and the fast-moving, narrative-driven world of global media. Sources indicate that this ally had previously handled sensitive situations involving high-profile families and political figures, often preventing scandals from escalating while simultaneously protecting the privacy of the individuals involved. The fact that they chose to step forward at this particular moment suggested that they perceived the crisis as both unprecedented and volatile, requiring immediate, careful management. The first step of this secret intervention involved discreet consultations with Meghan and Harry's closest advisors. These meetings were described as tense but productive, occurring in secure locations with strict confidentiality protocols. The strategist's approach was unconventional yet meticulous. Rather than attempt to counter the media narrative directly or push for a public apology, they focused on crafting a long-term strategy that would stabilize the situation, protect the children, and subtly influence public perception without triggering further backlash. Every recommendation was weighed against potential pitfalls, legal implications, and the emotional well-being of the family. Meanwhile, within Buckingham Palace, the presence of this unknown ally was felt almost immediately. Courtiers and senior advisors began noticing unusual patterns. Press inquiries were subtly redirected, leaks that would have normally reached tabloids were intercepted, and certain media outlets suddenly shifted tone, publishing more measured analyses instead of sensationalist headlines. It quickly became apparent to palace insiders that someone with extraordinary influence had entered the equation, capable of controlling the narrative without public acknowledgement. This invisible hand, some whispered, might very well determine whether the crisis escalated into irreversible scandal or remained contained. In parallel, social media channels began to display subtle but notable shifts in discourse. Viral posts that had earlier been overtly critical of the Sussexes were slowly replaced with more balanced accounts, highlighting the challenges of parenting under unprecedented scrutiny and the ethical dilemmas of surrogacy disclosures. Analysts speculated that the intervention was indirectly influencing sentiment through controlled messaging, targeted stories, and behind-the-scenes coordination with sympathetic journalists. While the public remained largely unaware, the effects of the intervention were profound, reshaping the media landscape in real time. The ally also initiated a series of private communications with senior figures within the royal establishment. These contacts were delicate and carefully orchestrated, designed to convey a sense of urgency and the importance of measured responses. Insiders later revealed that these communications emphasized both the reputational risks of aggressive public statements and the potential for long-term reconciliation if handled discreetly. Some senior royals, initially skeptical, reportedly acknowledged the strategic brilliance of the approach, recognizing that direct confrontation could escalate tensions far beyond control. At the same time, Meghan and Harry were navigating personal challenges that compounded the public crisis. Protecting their children remained the top priority, and the couple made difficult decisions regarding public appearances, media engagements, and social interactions. Their interactions with extended family members were carefully moderated, with strict guidelines on what could be discussed and how. The presence of the secret ally provided both reassurance and tactical advantage, allowing them to maintain a semblance of normalcy while managing the unprecedented scrutiny surrounding their lives. The intervention extended beyond media management and royal communications. The strategist introduced innovative measures to safeguard the children's privacy, ranging from enhanced digital security to controlled exposure during public events. Every outing, photo, and interview was meticulously planned, balancing visibility with protection. The Allies team monitored global media in real time, identifying potential threats, misinformation campaigns, and instances of misrepresentation, then proactively addressing them before they could gain traction. This level of coordination and foresight was unprecedented, providing Meghan and Harry with a tactical advantage that few could anticipate. Inside the palace, tensions continued to simmer. Courtiers observed the shifting dynamics with a mixture of confusion and admiration, noting that traditional mechanisms of control were being subtly bypassed. The Allies' influence appeared to transcend hierarchy, leveraging both insider knowledge and strategic media engagement to steer outcomes without overt confrontation. Some advisors reportedly grew frustrated, feeling their authority undermined, while others quietly acknowledged that this invisible intervention may have prevented a far greater scandal. The tension between preserving royal protocol and responding to unprecedented circumstances created an atmosphere of constant negotiation, strategy, and delicate maneuvering. Meanwhile, the global audience remained captivated. Public curiosity and speculation reached unprecedented levels, as every subtle development, whether a delayed statement, a carefully curated photograph, or a sudden shift in media tone, was analyzed exhaustively. The Allies' intervention was effective precisely because it was invisible, rather than attempting to dominate headlines. The strategist shaped perceptions gradually, allowing narratives to evolve in ways that benefited the family's long-term interests. Analysts later described this approach as surgical narrative management, emphasizing that it was both preventative and corrective, anticipating controversies before they fully materialized. In private, Meghan and Harry reportedly developed a deep trust in this unexpected ally. Their confidence was rooted not only in the strategist's expertise, but also in a shared understanding of values. Protecting family, maintaining integrity, and navigating a global spotlight without compromising core principles. The presence of this ally allowed them to approach public appearances with greater assurance, knowing that each statement, action, and disclosure was being carefully evaluated for maximum protective effect. The couple's sense of agency, previously constrained by external pressures, was restored, enabling them to focus on parenting and personal well-being amidst an ongoing global controversy. As weeks passed, the combined effect of public messaging, strategic media management, and protective measures began to take hold. Social discourse began to stabilize, with discussions shifting from scandalous speculation to thoughtful consideration of family dynamics, parental responsibility, and the evolving role of monarchy in modern society. While criticism remained, it was less frenetic and more nuanced, suggesting that the invisible intervention had successfully moderated public perception. Royal historians later noted that this period marked a significant departure from prior crises, emphasizing the power of discreet, highly informed strategic intervention. Yet the intervention was not without risk. Insiders revealed that any misstep, leak, or miscommunication could have reversed the gains, reigniting global frenzy and exacerbating tensions within the palace. The strategist's approach required constant vigilance, rapid response, and adaptive planning, blending diplomacy, media acumen, and crisis management. Every move was calculated, every statement scrutinized, and every potential scenario anticipated. The complexity of managing global perception while protecting personal and familial interests created a high-stakes environment where precision was paramount. By the end of this chapter, the unexpected ally had effectively reshaped the trajectory of the crisis. Meghan and Harry maintained their agency, protected their children, and subtly influenced both media narratives and palace reactions without triggering direct confrontation. The intervention demonstrated that even in situations of unprecedented public scrutiny, careful planning, discretion, and strategic expertise could alter outcomes, safeguard reputations, and protect families from further harm. This chapter underscores the power of invisible influence, the complexity of high-profile crises, and the extraordinary lengths required to navigate modern challenges faced by those living in the global spotlight. Just as the quiet stabilization of Meghan and Harry's public image seemed to gain momentum, an unforeseen complication erupted, one that threatened to undo all the careful work orchestrated by the secret ally. A whistleblower had emerged from within a seemingly innocuous layer of their operational network, a former contractor involved in logistics and event management who had grown disillusioned by the secrecy and the high-stakes manipulation surrounding the family. This individual claimed to possess sensitive, previously undisclosed evidence regarding the surrogacy arrangements, private communications, and decisions about the children's appearances at public events. The leak set off a chain reaction of unease, panic, and calculated response, as the contents of the whistleblower's information had the potential to ignite global media scrutiny like a wildfire in a parched forest. The whistleblower, identified only in certain circles as someone with close access to operational details, was initially dismissed by some advisors as unreliable or motivated by personal vendettas. Yet as the contents of their claims began to surface in discrete forums and encrypted communications, it became clear that portions of the evidence were credible and potentially explosive. The information allegedly included audio recordings, internal messages, and logistical documents showing the meticulous coordination involved in surrogacy logistics, travel arrangements, and orchestrated public appearances. While nothing in the documents proved illegal, the revelation that such measures had been employed without full transparency to the public created an ethical dilemma that could be exploited by media and rival factions within the royal establishment. Once the leak was recognized as credible, the palace and Meghan and Harry's team were thrust into immediate crisis mode. Every potential narrative had to be considered, every outlet preemptively addressed, and every possible leak anticipated. The secret ally, already deeply involved in prior interventions, expanded their scope to include containment strategies specific to this whistleblower situation. Teams were dispatched to evaluate the authenticity of the leaked materials, to trace the source of the breach, and to mitigate the risk of further dissemination. Each action was taken with the utmost discretion, given the high sensitivity of both the documents and the individuals involved. Among the most troubling elements of the whistleblower's claims were inconsistencies in prior public statements, as interpreted through the new evidence. Certain communications hinted at planning sessions that involved scheduling children for appearances in ways that contradicted previously given timelines. These revelations, though technical in nature, were immediately poised to be misrepresented as intentional deception or manipulation. The media, ever hungry for sensational angles, would not need much prompting to frame this as scandalous misconduct. The family's advisors recognized that any public misstep in responding could amplify the narrative and create irreversible reputational damage. Strategically, the secret ally approached the situation with layered precision. First, a direct but private negotiation with the whistleblower was initiated, emphasizing confidentiality, the potential consequences of public dissemination, and offering structured resolutions in exchange for cooperation. Legal counsel prepared carefully worded agreements that preserved discretion while maintaining leverage over the whistleblower's actions. Simultaneously, controlled leaks of contextual information were prepared to provide the public with neutral interpretations that preemptively framed any potential misrepresentation. These measures reflected a dual strategy: contain the source and control the narrative in anticipation of any unavoidable disclosures. Behind the scenes, Meghan and Harry were navigating an emotional storm as well. The existence of hidden evidence concerning the children and their lives was profoundly unsettling. Questions about transparency, ethics, and the balance between privacy and public curiosity weighed heavily on them. Private sessions with psychologists, trusted confidants, and the secret ally were conducted to reinforce emotional resilience, mitigate stress, and craft messaging that was both honest and protective. Each decision was calibrated not only for public perception, but also for the immediate psychological welfare of the children, who remained largely unaware of the intricate maneuvers occurring around them. The intervention also required delicate diplomacy within royal circles. Courtiers and senior advisors were caught in a tense balancing act, acknowledging the gravity of the whistleblower's revelations while avoiding unnecessary alarm or escalation. Private meetings were held in secure rooms, sometimes extending for hours, with strategic briefings outlining potential outcomes, media risks, and tactical messaging. Some palace insiders quietly expressed frustration, feeling that conventional methods of handling sensitive information had been bypassed in favor of clandestine interventions. Others recognized the brilliance of this coordinated strategy, acknowledging that proactive containment and narrative management could prevent far-reaching fallout. At the same time, the media environment was shifting rapidly. Certain journalists, alerted to the existence of a whistleblower, began probing for hints of corroboration. Anonymous sources were cited, small discrepancies in official statements were highlighted, and subtle patterns in public appearances were analyzed with a critical eye. Social media amplified these observations exponentially, creating a climate in which even minor inconsistencies could ignite trending discussions and online outrage. The secret ally anticipated this, preparing rapid response communication teams capable of deploying factual clarifications and contextual narratives immediately upon detection of emerging stories. The precision and timing of these interventions became pivotal in preventing sensationalist misinterpretation from taking hold. Interestingly, the whistleblower's motivations were not solely malicious. Investigators later found that their primary concern revolved around perceived ethical lapses and the potential psychological impact on the children. While their methods were arguably reckless, they framed the revelations as a moral imperative, claiming that transparency was necessary for public accountability. Understanding this perspective, the Secret Allies team tailored their approach to address not only the immediate threat of disclosure, but also the underlying ethical concerns. Controlled dialogue, assurances of the children's welfare, and clear boundaries regarding privacy were established as preconditions for any negotiated resolution. As evidence was scrutinized, the picture that emerged was complex and nuanced. The logistical coordination behind public appearances, surrogacy arrangements, and media interactions reflected meticulous planning rather than intentional deceit. Yet the potential for misrepresentation was immense, as small fragments of truth, when isolated, could easily be framed as scandalous manipulation. This duality underscored the fragility of public perception in high-profile situations and highlighted the importance of narrative control in protecting reputations while preserving factual integrity. The whistleblower's emergence also intensified internal tensions within the family's immediate and extended circles. Advisors debated the merits of disclosure versus concealment, weighing transparency against the risk of reputational damage. Personal loyalties were tested as friends and staff members navigated conflicting pressures, supporting the family, managing public scrutiny, and protecting their own positions. The stakes were exceptionally high, as any misjudgment could lead to irreversible exposure, strained relationships, and heightened media frenzy. Ultimately, the secret ally orchestrated a multi-pronged response that combined negotiation, strategic communication, ethical consideration, and public perception management. Every step was meticulously calibrated. The whistleblower's claims were addressed privately and resolved. Selective controlled disclosures contextualized the evidence for public understanding, and internal communications ensured that all involved parties were aligned in both action and messaging. This approach stabilized the situation, preventing it from escalating into a full-blown scandal while simultaneously addressing the ethical and emotional dimensions raised by the whistleblower. By the end of this chapter, the intricate balance between secrecy, public perception, and ethical responsibility had been temporarily restored. Meghan and Harry were once again able to focus on parenting and personal well-being, while the secret allies' intervention demonstrated that even in the face of unexpected leaks and whistleblower threats, careful strategy, discretion, and ethical consideration could prevent the narrative from spiraling out of control. The chapter leaves a critical lesson. In high-profile crises, The combination of foresight, negotiation, and controlled narrative management can protect both reputations and personal lives, even under the glare of global attention. No sooner had the whistleblower situation been quietly stabilized than a new challenge emerged, one far more unpredictable and relentless. International media outlets had caught wind of murmurs regarding surrogacy arrangements, alleged strategic manipulation of public appearances, and private family communications. Even without direct access to classified or sensitive documents, reporters and freelance journalists began piecing together narratives from fragments of online chatter, obscure social media posts, and the whistleblower's earlier hints. Within hours, the potential for a worldwide scandal became undeniable. Headlines in multiple languages hinted at secrets, deception, and hidden truths, ensuring that the situation would escalate far beyond local or national media. The first wave of reporting was subtle, almost innocuous, with articles presenting carefully hedged speculation, questioning timelines, highlighting inconsistencies in prior statements, and offering analysis that seemed neutral but carried implicit sensationalism. By the second wave, however, the tone shifted. Certain journalists, emboldened by the possibility of breaking a major story, began framing narratives in more provocative terms, suggesting deliberate manipulation and carefully choreographed appearances designed to mislead the public. Social media amplified these reports exponentially. Influencers, news aggregators, and opinionated commentators dissected every post, gesture, and interview, creating a digital echo chamber in which even minor discrepancies became viral talking points. Meghan and Harry's team recognized immediately that reactive measures alone would be insufficient. A comprehensive strategy had to be deployed, one capable of addressing multiple dimensions simultaneously, clarifying facts, managing public perception, and countering misleading narratives without appearing defensive. The secret ally, already deeply embedded in prior crisis management operations, took the lead in coordinating responses across continents. Media monitoring teams were mobilized around the clock to detect emerging trends, evaluate the credibility of leaks, and anticipate the trajectory of potentially damaging stories. Every detail mattered: timing of releases, tone of messaging, choice of spokespersons, and the subtle crafting of narratives to retain factual accuracy while minimizing sensationalist interpretations. Behind the scenes, the complexity of the situation was staggering. Journalists were probing questions that reached into private life, legal experts were analyzing potential liability, and public relations consultants were drafting contingency messaging for multiple scenarios. Each action required careful calibration. Too aggressive a defense could be perceived as obstruction, too passive a response could allow misinformation to dominate. Meetings were convened at unusual hours, with international communication channels kept secure to prevent leaks. The family and advisors had to remain calm under the scrutiny of millions of eyes, balancing emotional responses with professional composure. Particularly challenging were the subtle insinuations regarding the children's welfare. International outlets speculated on the ethical dimensions of surrogacy, privacy, and child exposure, framing questions that blurred the line between reporting and moral judgment. While the family had always prioritized the children's safety and emotional stability, the media frenzy threatened to cast routine actions as deliberate manipulations. The secret ally recognized that controlling the narrative surrounding the children was paramount. Carefully crafted communications highlighted routine parenting practices, contextualized appearances, and emphasized the commitment to the children's well-being without divulging sensitive details. The goal was to humanize the family while neutralizing the potential for scandalous interpretations. Adding to the turbulence were geopolitical dimensions. Certain foreign media outlets, seeking to exploit the high-profile nature of the story, began inserting political undertones, framing the family's private choices as symbolic of larger cultural or political conflicts. Analysts in different regions speculated on influence, power dynamics, and the implications for diplomatic relationships. While much of this analysis was speculative, it had real-world consequences. Public opinion polls in multiple countries began showing a mixture of curiosity, distrust, and fascination. The ripple effect was global, demanding that every statement, appearance, and action be strategically evaluated for potential international perception. Social media presented another layer of complexity. Platforms operated on an immediacy that traditional media could not match. Videos, comments, and posts circulated at unprecedented speeds, often outpacing fact-checking mechanisms. Rumors were amplified by algorithms that prioritized engagement, and sensationalist narratives quickly gained traction. The secret ally, anticipating this, established rapid response teams capable of producing verified content, clarifying misinterpretations, and issuing corrective statements within minutes. This required not only technical expertise, but also psychological insight into how audiences process and react to emotionally charged content. Each interaction, each post, was meticulously crafted to stabilize perception while countering misinformation without exacerbating the frenzy. In parallel, legal teams were monitoring potential threats to privacy, defamation risks, and compliance with international media laws. Certain stories, although sensationalized, risked crossing legal boundaries regarding false claims and misrepresentation. Coordinated efforts ensured that media outlets received precise clarifications, legal notices when necessary, and factual statements designed to correct inaccuracies without creating the perception of censorship. Every intervention was delicate. Overly aggressive legal action could appear adversarial, while insufficient action could allow reputational damage to compound. The balance required strategic foresight, patience, and nuanced understanding of both legal frameworks and media psychology. Interestingly, the international media storm also had internal effects. Staff members within Meghan and Harry's team experienced heightened stress, navigating the demands of constant vigilance, rapid decision-making, and the pressure of global scrutiny. Psychological support mechanisms were implemented, including stress management, counseling, and structured rotation schedules to ensure that key decision-makers remained clear-headed. Meetings extended late into the night, sometimes overlapping multiple time zones, as advisors coordinated messaging, monitored trends, and adapted strategies in real time. The intensity of these operations underscored the extraordinary challenges faced by high-profile individuals whose personal lives were subject to relentless global observation.